You're sitting there looking at your pension balance, and somewhere in the back of your mind, you're doing the maths. April 2027. HMRC 40%. You've probably seen the headlines by now, maybe watched a few videos about it. And the message from most of them is pretty much the same. Get your money out now, give it to your kids, spend it before the government takes it. So you think about ringing your bank, moving £50,000 to your son so he can get on the property ladder. You tell yourself, you're being smart. You're getting ahead of Rachel Reeves, ahead of the new rules, ahead of the clock. That impulse makes complete sense. When a deadline like April 2027 is hanging over you, doing something feels safer than doing nothing. But that particular something, writing a check directly to your children, could end up costing your family far more than HMRC ever would. Not because the rules have changed, because of what happens after the money leaves your account. Before you sign anything, I want to show you two things most people in this space aren't talking about. A legal mechanism buried inside HMRC's own rulebook that lets you move money outside your taxable estate, without touching your capital, without the 7-year clock, and without forcing yourself to spend money you aren't mentally ready to let go of. And a structural flaw in the give while you live advice that could hand a portion of your retirement savings to someone who isn't even in your family. This isn't about telling you to hoard your money. It's not about spending it all either. It's about understanding what you're actually deciding before you make the call. There's a particular kind of person who ends up in this situation. They've worked for 35, maybe 40 years. They've been careful, not tight, just sensible. They topped up their pension when they could, paid off the mortgage early, kept a decent buffer in the bank. By most measures, they've done everything right. And now they're retired, or close to it. The money is there, and yet, spending it feels wrong. Not all spending. Groceries, the gas bill, a meal out with the family, that's fine. But anything that feels like a treat, anything that costs more than strictly necessary, anything that's just for them, that's where the discomfort starts. Upgrading from economy to premium economy on a long-haul flight, buying a newer car when the old one still runs, taking a 2-week holiday instead of one. The internal conversation usually sounds something like, "I don't really need it," or "What if something comes up?" Or simply, "It doesn't feel right." I've sat across from people with well over £1 million in their pension who tensed up over an unexpected dental bill. And I don't say that to judge them. I say it because I've seen it so many times it stopped surprising me. My own father was the same way. Spent his whole working life building a rainy day fund. And when the rain finally came, he'd forgotten how to open the umbrella. So where does that feeling come from? It comes from the accumulation phase. For 40 years, your brain was rewarded every time the balance went up. A higher number meant safety, meant progress, meant you were doing the right thing. That's not a character flaw, it's a deeply trained response. The scoreboard went up, you felt good. The scoreboard went down, even slightly, something tightened in your chest. The problem is that the retirement phase requires the exact opposite instinct. You have to draw down. The number is supposed to go down. That's what it was always for. But the brain doesn't get that memo automatically. It just sees the balance falling and fires off the same alarm it always did. Danger, stop, pull back. Behavioral economists call this loss aversion. But in practice, it shows up less as a clinical bias and more as a vague shame. A sense that enjoying your own money is somehow irresponsible. That spending on yourself is taking something away from your children. That the prudent thing, always, endlessly, is to wait a little longer. And here's the trade-off nobody names clearly, that waiting doesn't make you safer. It just makes you an unpaid custodian of wealth you may never actually use. The capital sits there, carefully protected, slowly accumulating in value, and at the end, a meaningful chunk of it goes to HMRC anyway, or to a divorce settlement you never saw coming, or to a care home that charges £70,000 a year and empties the pot in 18 months regardless. Holding on doesn't eliminate risk. It just trades one risk for another. The discomfort you feel about spending is real, and it makes sense given everything you've been through to build what you have. but it is not a reliable guide to what's actually safe. It's a reflex, not a strategy. And just as you're working through all of that, just as you're trying to figure out whether it's okay to actually live on what you've saved, the government dropped a ticking clock into the middle of it. Until quite recently, your pension was one of the most tax-efficient assets you could pass on. If you died before 75, your unused pension pot went to your beneficiaries completely free of inheritance tax. After 75, they'd pay income tax on withdrawals, but the pension itself sat outside your estate for IHT purposes. It was for a long time one of the cleanest ways to pass wealth down a generation. That changes on the 6th of April, 2027. From that date, unused pension funds will be brought inside your estate for inheritance tax purposes, which means HMRC can apply the standard 40% charge on anything above the nil rate ban threshold of £325,000, or up to £500,000 if your estate includes a family home you're passing to direct descendants. To put that plainly, if you've spent your working life building a pension pot of £600,000 and your estate tips over that threshold, you could be looking at a six-figure tax bill on money you never even withdrew, money you were saving for your family, money that HMRC until last year wasn't entitled to touch. That's a genuine shift, and it's reasonable to be concerned about it. What's not reasonable is the response that started circulating, mostly from financial influencers and a handful of advisors who've spotted the anxiety and built content around it. The message, stripped back, is simple. Spend it now, give it away fast, die with nothing. Die with zero is the phrase you'll hear. The idea is that any wealth left behind at death is wasted. Money that could have been enjoyed, experiences that never happened. And as a philosophical point, there's something in it. I'll come back to that. But as a response to April 2027 specifically, it ignores something fundamental. Something that will matter far more to most people in their 80s than their IHT bill. Care home fees. The average cost of residential care in England is now over £40,000 a year. Nursing care, the kind you need when you genuinely can't manage independently, runs closer to £60,000 to £70,000 a year in most parts of the country. And unlike a tax bill, you can't plan around it with a 7-year rule. It arrives when your body decides, not when your accountant does. I used to think that minimizing tax was the primary objective. A few years ago, I would have framed almost every conversation around it. I was wrong. Tax is a problem. Running out of money at 84 while you're in a care home that costs £5,500 a month, that's a different category of problem entirely. The nil rate band has been frozen at £325,000 since 2009. It hasn't moved in 16 years. Inflation has quietly eroded its real value, which means more and more ordinary estates, not wealthy ones, ordinary ones, are being pulled into IHT territory without their owners realizing it. So yes, April 2027 matters. The rule change is real and it deserves attention. But the advice to simply liquidate your pension and hand the cash to your children as fast as possible. That's not a plan, that's a panic. And panic, when it comes to retirement assets, is expensive. Because the moment that money leaves your pension and lands in your child's bank account, you've lost something more than tax efficiency. You've lost control of it entirely. David is 62. He's got a good pension, a paid-off house in Surrey, and a son in his early 30s who's been renting for years and can't quite get the deposit together. The April 2027 deadline is in the back of David's mind. He's been reading about the new IHT rules, and someone in his golf club mentioned the 7-year gifting rule. Make a potentially exempt transfer now, survive 7 years, and the gift falls outside your estate completely. So David withdraws £50,000 from his pension, transfers it to his son, and feels quietly pleased with himself. He's helped his boy onto the property ladder and outmaneuvered HMRC in one move. 3 years later, his son's marriage breaks down. Under UK family law, assets brought into a marriage, including cash gifts from parents, can be considered part of the matrimonial pot during divorce proceedings. There's no automatic protection just because the money came from someone else. A family court judge has wide discretion, and in many cases, that £50,000 gets treated as a shared asset, which means £25,000 of David's retirement savings. Money he spent 30 years building walks out of the family entirely. David didn't do anything wrong. He followed advice that's repeated constantly in this space. But the advice had a structural flaw nobody mentioned. The moment that money left his account and became his son's asset, David had no legal claim over it whatsoever. It was gone. His son couldn't ring-fence it even if he wanted to. ONS data puts the divorce rate in England and Wales at around 42% of marriages. That's not a fringe risk. That's roughly a coin flip. If you have adult children who are married or likely to marry, a direct cash gift carries that exposure every single time. The alternative, and it's one most people haven't heard of because it doesn't generate the same kind of headline, is something called a gift on loan trust. The mechanism is straightforward. Instead of gifting the money outright, you loan it to a trust. The trust then makes the funds available to your children to use, for a house deposit, for school fees, for whatever the purpose is. But legally, the money remains a debt owed back to your estate. It never becomes your child's asset in the way that a direct gift does, which means in a divorce, it's protected. A family court cannot divide a debt. The money your family worked for stays in your bloodline, regardless of what happens to the marriage. The IHT benefit is different from a direct PET. It works through a different mechanism, but the protection against relationship breakdown is absolute in a way that no outright gift can ever be. David could have done this. The same £50,000, the same intention, the same outcome for his son in terms of access to funds, but instead of handing over an asset that could be split by a court, he would have extended a loan through a structure that a divorce settlement can't touch. Direct gift, you hand the money over and hope the marriage holds. Gift on loan trust. The money is there for your family, and it stays there. That's the whole difference. Most people trying to solve the IHT problem are looking at the same two options: spend the money down, or give large chunks away and hope the 7-year clock runs out in their favor. There's a third option. It's been sitting in HMRC's own rulebook for decades. It's not a loophole, it's not aggressive tax planning, and it doesn't require a solicitor to set up an offshore structure. It's a straightforward exemption that the vast majority of people approaching retirement have never been told about. It's called Normal Expenditure out of income. It comes from the Inheritance Tax Act 1984, and it works like this. Any money you give away from your surplus income left over after you've maintained your normal standard of living, falls outside your estate for IHT purposes immediately, not after 7 years, not subject to taper relief. Immediately. The 3 conditions are simple. The gifts need to be regular. They need to come from income, not capital. And they can't leave you unable to meet your usual outgoings. That's it. For someone drawing a state pension plus a defined benefit pension, there's often more income coming in each month than they're actually spending. That surplus, the amount sitting in the current account at the end of each month because they haven't found a reason to use it, is exactly what this exemption was designed for. Think about what David could have done differently. Instead of withdrawing £50,000 in one lump, triggering income tax on the withdrawal, handing over an asset exposed to his son's divorce, and depleting his capital buffer, David sets up a standing order. £500 a month, paid directly into his grandson's junior ISA, regular. From income, within his normal standard of living. After 8 years, that's £48,000 transferred, almost the same amount. Every penny of it has left his taxable estate the moment it was paid. No 7-year rule, no court risk. And David's pension pot, his actual capital, hasn't moved. That's what changes when you use this exemption correctly. You're not spending down your safety net. You're using the income your assets generate as a pressure valve, quietly, regularly reducing your IHT exposure without touching the reserves that would cover care home fees at 84. The difference matters enormously. Capital is your protection against the unknown. Income is what flows naturally beyond your needs. The normal expenditure exemption lets you use one, without touching the other. Most of the noise around April 2027 is about moving large sums fast. This approach does the opposite. Small amounts, consistently from the right source. No drama, no panic, no irreversible decisions made under pressure. HMRC wrote the exemption into law. It's there to be used. But even with the right tax structures in place, there's still a question that none of this answers. And it's the one that actually keeps people up at night, not the tax bill, but the time. Here's a number that doesn't appear in any pension illustration. According to data from the Office for National Statistics and Age UK, the average person in England can expect to live in good health. Genuinely good health. The kind where you can travel, walk without pain, keep up with grandchildren, until somewhere around 62 or 63. After that, the picture starts to shift. Mobility problems, chronic conditions, the gradual narrowing of what's physically possible. By 75, a significant proportion of people are managing at least one condition that limits what they can do day to day. That's not a counsel of despair. Plenty of people are active well into their 80s, but as a planning reality, it changes the maths considerably. Most retirement planning is built around life expectancy, how long you might live. Very little of it is built around health span, how long you'll be able to do the things that actually cost money and require energy. Those two numbers are not the same, and the gap between them is where most of the regret lives. Your money tends to peak around 65. You've finished accumulating, you've paid off the big debts, the pension is as large as it's going to get. Your health, if the averages hold, has already started its slow decline. There's a window, roughly the decade between 60 and 70, where both are still reasonably intact at the same time, where you can afford to go and your body will cooperate. That window is not infinite, and it cannot be reopened. I could sit here and map out the most technically optimized IHT strategy HMRC's rulebook allows. I can do that, but I'll be honest with you. I've never found an algorithm that measures the value of carrying your grandchild across the beach at Cornwall while your knees still let you. I don't think one exists. Here's a detail that doesn't make it into financial planning conversations, but probably should. Children between the ages of roughly 5 and 8 want to spend time with their grandparents in a particular way. They want the walks, the seaside trips, the garden afternoons. That window is about 3 years wide. It passes whether you're there for it or not. Delay the family holiday by 5 years, and you may not be delaying it, you may be cancelling it, without ever having made that decision consciously. Saving an extra £10,000 by staying home instead of going will not meaningfully change your financial trajectory. A pension pot of £580,000 at 70 and a pension pot of £590,000 at 70 will produce almost identical outcomes in retirement. But the memory of that trip, for you, for your children, for the grandchildren who were the right age to appreciate it, that doesn't have an equivalent. The guilt around spending your own money is real. I'm not dismissing it. But it was built for the accumulation phase, and you are no longer in the accumulation phase. Keeping your capital intact for genuine emergencies, care costs, health needs, the unexpected. That's sensible, and the tools we've talked about make that possible without sacrificing your estate to HMRC. But the surplus, the income left over each month, the money that would otherwise just sit there incrementally growing while your health span quietly contracts. That's not a reserve. That's a life, waiting to be lived. It's time to give yourself permission. Let's bring this together. April 2027 is real. The IHT rule change on pension funds is real. And the anxiety you feel when you look at that balance and start calculating what HMRC might take, that's completely understandable. But the response most people are being pushed towards, liquidate fast, give generously, spend before the deadline, carries risks that aren't being named. A direct cash gift to your children is an asset they own, which means it's an asset a divorce court can divide, and spending down your capital to avoid a tax bill you may never actually face is not a strategy. It's a panic dressed up as one. The tools exist to do this properly. Normal expenditure out of income lets you move surplus income outside your taxable estate immediately. without the 7-year clock, without touching your capital, and without forcing yourself to make irreversible decisions under pressure. Gift-on-loan trusts let you support your children financially while keeping that money ring fenced from whatever life throws at their marriages. These aren't complicated structures reserved for the very wealthy. They're legal mechanisms that have been sitting in plain sight for years. But beyond the tax planning, and this matters, you are not a scoreboard. Your pension balance is not the final measure of a life well managed. It was always a means, not an end. The accumulation phase trained you to protect it, grow it, never let it fall. That instinct served you well for 40 years. It is not serving you now if it's stopping you from using what you built. The health span window is narrow. The years where your money and your energy overlap, where you can actually do the things that cost money and require physical capacity. Those years are finite in a way that no financial projection will ever show you clearly. So tonight, I want you to do one thing. Write down something you've been putting off. A trip, an experience, something you've told yourself you'll do when the time is right, when the numbers are right, when you feel ready. Leave it in the comments. Just name it. You don't have to justify it to anyone. Because the time being right and the numbers being right and feeling ready, for most people that moment never officially arrives. You have to decide it's arrived. If you want to understand how gift-on-loan trusts and normal expenditure exemptions work in more detail, how to set them up, what the HMRC paperwork actually looks like, whether they're right for your situation, subscribe to Arthur's UK. That's exactly what the next videos will cover. The tax problem is solvable. The time problem is not. Use both wisely.